The cold stone floor beneath Ned Stark's knees felt harder than it ever had before. The great sept was silent, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that waits for blood. The crowd outside roared like a restless sea, chanting for confession, for mercy, for spectacle. They wanted to hear the honorable Lord of Winterfell break. Ned lifted his head slowly. His body was weak. The dungeon had taken its toll. Hunger, beatings, sleepless nights. But his mind was still sharp, and his heart was still his own. That was something no cell could steal. They had told him what to say. Admit treason. Admit that Joffrey was the true king. Confess that he lied about the boy's birth. In return, they promised mercy. He would take the black. He would live out his days at the wall. His daughters would be spared. It sounded simple. Just words. Just a lie. But Ned Stark had lived his whole life by truth. And now, truth was about to cost him everything. He looked up at the royal platform. Joffrey sat there with a cruel little smile that did not belong on a king's face. Beside him stood Cersei, watching carefully, her expression tight. She expected him to kneel properly, to break, to bend. Sansa stood close to the platform too. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She believed he would confess. She believed it would save him. Arya was not there. He did not know where she was. That thought worried him more than chains ever could. A Septon stepped forward and spoke loudly to the crowd, announcing that Eddard Stark would confess his crimes against the crown. The noise swelled. Ned rose slowly to his feet. His legs trembled, but he stood straight. He could feel every eye on him, the weight of thousands of people pressing down. He thought of Winterfell, of snow falling quietly in the Godswood, of Bran climbing where he should not, of Robb trying so hard to be a man, of Rickon too young to understand any of this, of Jon standing alone on the wall, and Catelyn. He wondered if she would forgive him for what he was about to do. He opened his mouth. "My name is Eddard Stark," he began, his voice hoarse but steady. The crowd quieted. "I served as hand of the king. So far, it was what they wanted. I was accused of treason." Cersei leaned forward slightly. Joffrey smiled wider. Ned paused. He could say it now. Just one sentence, one lie. It would end this. Instead, he felt something rise inside him. Not pride, not stubbornness, truth. "I discovered that Joffrey Baratheon is not the rightful king." A ripple moved through the crowd like wind across tall grass. Cersei's face went pale. Joffrey blinked, confused. Ned continued, louder now. "He is not the son of King Robert. He was born of incest between Queen Cersei and her brother Jaime Lannister." Gasps, shouts. A woman screamed. A man laughed in disbelief. The silence shattered. Cersei shot to her feet. "Seize him!" she cried, but her voice was almost drowned by the chaos. Joffrey stood as well, his face twisting with rage. "Liar! He lies! Cut out his tongue!" But the words had already flown. They could not be taken back. Gold cloaks rushed forward, grabbing Ned's arms roughly. Someone struck him across the face. He tasted blood, but he did not look away from the platform. He saw fear in Cersei's eyes. Not anger. Fear. The High Septon shouted for order, but the crowd was no longer obedient. People were arguing, shouting questions. Some were defending the king. Others were whispering, thinking. Seeds had been planted. Ned felt himself forced to his knees again. A sword was drawn behind him. He knew what that meant. This was no longer about confession. This was about silencing him. But it was too late. He thought of Stannis Baratheon. If word reached him, he would not stay silent. Stannis was rigid, hard, unbending. If he heard this truth spoken before thousands, he would act. And the North. Robb would hear of this. Robb would not believe his father lied at the end. The North would not kneel quietly. Ned closed his eyes for a brief moment. He had chosen war. The blade pressed against his neck. Joffrey's voice rang out, high and furious. "I am the king. I will not be slandered by a traitor. Ser Ilyn, bring me his head." Cersei turned sharply toward her son. "No," she began, but she was too late. The boy king wanted blood. Ned opened his eyes again. The sky above the sept was bright blue. Strange how peaceful it looked. He did not regret it. If he had confessed, the lie would have lived on. The realm would rot quietly under a false king. Now the rot was exposed. Now the seven kingdoms would have to choose. The sword lifted, for a heartbeat, everything slowed. He thought of Winterfell one last time, of snow, of wolves howling in the distance. The blade fell. And in that single violent moment, the fate of the realm changed forever. Because this time, Eddard Stark had not confessed, and the truth, once spoken aloud before thousands, could not be buried. Far away in the north, ravens would soon fly, and when they did, the war would not begin with confusion and doubt. It would begin with certainty. The news did not travel slowly. It exploded. Before Ned Stark's blood had fully dried on the steps of the Great Sept, whispers were already racing through King's Landing like wildfire in dry grass. Some called him a traitor to the end. Others said he died braver than any man in the city, but everyone repeated the same words. Incest, not the rightful king. Jaime Lannister. By nightfall, the taverns were louder than usual. People argued over cups of ale. Some claimed they had always suspected something strange about the royal children's golden hair. Others insisted it was northern lies meant to weaken the throne. The gold cloaks tried to silence talk, but you cannot arrest a rumor once it starts breathing. Inside the Red Keep, things were far less loud and far more dangerous. Cersei stood by the window of her chambers, her hands gripping the stone so tightly her knuckles were white. Below, the city lights flickered like uncertain stars. She could feel it shifting. The mood, the balance, the fear. He should have confessed, she said quietly. Jaime leaned against the wall, his golden armor half removed. His expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp. You knew there was a chance he wouldn't. He had daughters, she snapped. He was supposed to love them more than honor. Jaime shrugged slightly. Some men don't know how to bend. Cersei turned toward him, fury flashing. This isn't about bending, this is about survival. He has made us vulnerable. Jaime walked closer. We still have the throne. We still have the city. Stannis is far away. But even as he said it, both of them knew the truth. Stannis Baratheon would not ignore this, not when the accusation had been shouted before thousands. Not when it came from a man known across the realm for his rigid honor. And Stannis did not forgive easily. Across the narrow sea, storms gathered, but that was a distant problem. The real storm was already forming in the north. At Winterfell, the Great Hall was heavy with silence as the Raven's message was read aloud. Robb Stark stood at the center, his hands clenched. Maester Luwin's voice trembled as he finished the letter. Lord Eddard Stark was executed after publicly declaring Joffrey Baratheon illegitimate. The words hung in the air like smoke. Robb felt something inside him break. Not loudly, not in a dramatic way. It was quieter than that, a cold crack spreading to his chest. They killed him anyway, he said softly. Catelyn sat still, her face pale but dry. No tears came. Not yet. Your father did not lie, she whispered. If he spoke those words before dying, then they were true. Robb nodded slowly. He believed that with all his heart. The Lannisters have murdered my father, he said, louder now, and they sit a bastard on the Iron Throne. The northern lords began murmuring, some angry, some cautious. Lord Umber slammed his fist against the table. Call the banners, he growled. We march south and tear that boy king from his chair. But it was not that simple. They have Sansa, Catelyn said sharply, and Arya's whereabouts are unknown. Robb's jaw tightened. His sisters, trapped among lions. For a moment, doubt flickered in his eyes. Then he remembered his father's final act. Ned had known the risk. He had known they might kill him anyway. And still, he chose to speak the truth. If he had confessed, perhaps there would have been peace for a little while longer. But it would have been a lie, a rot spreading quietly. Now there was no confusion, No divided loyalty. This is not rebellion, Robb said firmly. This is justice. The hall fell silent. We will not kneel to a false king, he continued. We will march south, but we will not rush blindly. We will send word to Stannis Baratheon. If he is the rightful king, then let him claim his crown. Some lords shifted uneasily at the thought of bending the knee to a southern ruler. But Robb raised his voice. My father died for the truth. We will stand with the truth. Outside, the wind howled against Winterfell's walls, as if the north itself approved. Far to the south, on Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon stood by a burning brazier as a letter was placed in his hand. He read it once, then again. His jaw tightened. So, he said slowly. The wolf spoke before he died. Davos Seaworth watched carefully. If it's true, your grace, it is true, Stannis cut in coldly. Eddard Stark was not a man given to lies. If he declared it before a crowd, then he believed it without doubt. A long silence followed. They have given me no choice, Stannis said finally. The Iron Throne is mine by right. And unlike others, Stannis did not speak of right lightly. Ships would soon be prepared. Banners would rise. Back in King's Landing, Joffrey paced angrily in the throne room. Why does it matter what a dead man said? He shouted, he's dead. Tywin Lannister had not yet arrived to steady the chaos. The court felt unstable, uncertain, because this time the war was not built on rumor. It was built on a dying man's final truth. And across the Seven Kingdoms, men and women were choosing sides, not based on fear alone, but on belief. Ned Stark had lost his head, but he had taken the realm's illusion with him, and now the lions would have to fight in the open. The Riverlands were the first to burn. Word of Ned Stark's final declaration spread faster than any army could march. In every castle from the Neck to the Blackwater, lords read the same message. Joffrey was no true king. In Riverrun, Catelyn's brother, Edmure Tully, paced the battlements as messengers arrived one after another. Each letter brought the same thing: fear, anger, and a single question. Is it true? Edmure wanted to believe it wasn't. War meant fire in his fields and blood in his rivers. But he had known Eddard Stark all his life. If Ned had spoken those words before thousands, then he had meant them. And if he meant them, then the realm was about to tear itself apart. Tywin Lannister understood that too. At Casterly Rock, he received the news in silence. He did not shout like Joffrey. He did not panic like Cersei. He simply stood by the long window overlooking the sea, listening as the letter was read aloud. When it was finished, he dismissed the maester. Jaime's recklessness had started this war when he attacked Ned in the streets. Cersei's ambition had deepened it. And now Joffrey's foolishness had made it unstoppable. Tywin folded his hands behind his back. Prepare the armies, he said quietly. He would not wait for Stannis to sail. He would not wait for the North to gather strength. If the Starks and Baratheons wanted war, he would give it to them on his terms. And so, Lannister banners rose. Back in the north, Robb Stark stood in the God's Wood beneath the Heart Tree. Snow drifted lightly around him, though it was not yet full winter. Grey Wind stood close at his side, silent and watchful. Catelyn approached slowly. You're going south, she said. It was not a question. Yes. You are still a boy, she whispered. Robb looked at her, and in that moment he did not look like a boy. He looked tired, hardened, angry. They killed my father after he spoke the truth, he said. They think fear will silence us. Catelyn reached out and touched his cheek. Promise me you will not let anger rule you. Robb hesitated. I promise I will remember what father died for. That was not the same thing. Soon the banners of the North gathered at Moat Cailin. Karstark, Umber, Mormont, Bolton, Thousands of men hardened by cold and loyalty. But something was different now. In the true history, many had marched because of betrayal and grief. Now they marched with certainty. There was no confusion about Joffrey's claim. Ned had removed that doubt with his last breath. As the army moved south, whispers followed them like shadows. In King's Landing, unrest grew. Small folk gathered in tight circles, speaking carefully. Some cursed the Starks, others muttered that perhaps the gods had punished a false king. Food prices rose. Trade slowed. Fear crept into every market stall. And in the Red Keep, Tyrion Lannister arrived at last. He had been summoned quickly by his father, who had not yet reached the city, but understood one thing clearly. Joffrey could not be trusted to manage this crisis. Tyrion walked into the throne room with a calm expression, though his mind raced. He had heard what Ned Stark said before dying. It complicated everything. "Uncle." Joffrey greeted him with forced pride. "The traitor's dead." "Yes," Tyrion replied smoothly, "and in dying he may have caused more trouble than he ever did alive." Joffrey scowled. He lied. "Perhaps," Tyrion said carefully, "but the realm believes he believed it. That was the problem. Truth mattered less than conviction." Meanwhile, on Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon stood before a painted table carved in the shape of Westeros. His fingers traced the coastline. "Send ravens to every lord," he commanded. "Tell them what Eddard Stark proclaimed before his execution. Tell them I claimed the throne by right of blood." Davos watched the ships in the harbor being prepared. War had come, and this time it came with a clear banner of legitimacy. Renly Baratheon, in the Reach, heard the same news and smiled slightly. "If Stannis claims the throne," Renly said lightly to Loras Tyrell, "he will expect us to kneel." Loras tilted his head. "And will we?" Renly's smile did not reach his eyes. "We shall see, because even truth does not stop ambition." As Robb's army crossed the neck, the first clash came sooner than expected. Lannister forces had already begun raiding the Riverlands, burning villages that declared for House Tully. War had not waited for formal declarations. It had already begun. Robb stood on a ridge overlooking smoke rising in the distance. His jaw tightened. "This is because he spoke," one lord muttered nearby. Robb heard him. "No," Robb said firmly. "This is because they feared the truth." And in King's Landing, Cersei finally understood the full cost of letting Ned Stark speak. If he had confessed, they could have painted him a liar and ended it cleanly. But now, his death looked like silencing, and silencing breeds suspicion. The realm was dividing not into rebels and loyalists, but into believers and doubters. And doubt is more dangerous than open rebellion, because doubt spreads quietly, like rot, like winter. And winter was coming faster than anyone had planned. By the time Robb Stark reached the Riverlands, the world already felt different. Not uncertain, not confused, but angry. Villages burned along the Trident. Smoke climbed into the sky like dark fingers accusing the heavens. Lannister soldiers had moved fast under Tywin's command, striking before the North could fully unite with the Tully forces. It was a message, clear and cruel. The alliance would not wait. Robb rode at the front of his army, Grey Wind pacing beside his horse. The young Stark no longer looked unsure. Every burned farmhouse hardened him. Every frightened small folk who bowed as he passed made something inside him settle into place. They had not chosen this war. It had been forced on them. When he reached Riverrun, he found it under siege. Jaime Lannister had struck boldly, surrounding the castle and capturing Edmure Tully in battle before retreating to strengthen his position. Catelyn met Robb in the courtyard. Her face was tight with worry. "Jaime grows reckless," she said. "No," Robb answered quietly. "He grows desperate." Because Jaime knew something now that he hadn't before. The North was not marching for pride alone. They were marching behind a truth spoken in public. That truth had power. In the Lannister war camp, Jaime sat by the fire with wine in hand, pretending calm, but his mind replayed Ned's words over and over. Incest. Illegitimate. Jaime had never cared what the realm thought, but he understood war, and this war had shifted. If Stannis sailed with that claim behind him, half the realm might hesitate before raising swords for Joffrey, and hesitation loses wars. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Tyrion Lannister took control of the small council with quiet efficiency. He replaced commanders of the city watch, tightened grain supplies, and began preparing the city for siege, because he knew it would come. Stannis was not a man who ignored opportunity. One evening, Tyrion stood on the walls overlooking Blackwater Bay. Beside him stood Varys, soft and unreadable as always. "The realm believes a dead man," Tyrion said. Varys smiled faintly. "The realm believes in stories, and Lord Stark's final act was a powerful one." "Was it true?" Tyrion asked suddenly. Varys tilted his head. "Does it matter?" It did. But Tyrion did not answer. Far away on Dragonstone, Stannis' fleet was nearly ready. The red banners of House Baratheon snapped sharply in the sea wind. Melisandre stood beside him, her red robes flowing like flame. "The Lord of Light favors you," she said softly. "The wolf's death cleared your path." Stannis did not smile. "Eddard Stark did what was right. I will do the same." But even as he said it, he knew the truth was not enough. He would have to take the throne by force, and he would show no mercy. In the Riverlands, Robb made his move sooner than expected. Rather than attack Tywin directly, he split his forces, a risky move. Bold, dangerous. But Robb had learned from his father's mistakes. Honor alone would not win this war. He sent part of his army to lure Tywin west, while he marched swiftly to confront Jaime's forces. It worked. Jaime, confident and eager for glory, underestimated the young Stark. In the Whispering Wood, beneath thick trees and darkness, Robb struck hard and fast. The Lannister camp erupted into chaos. Steel clashed, horses screamed, men shouted in confusion. Jaime fought fiercely, cutting down northern soldiers with skill and fury. But he had walked into a trap. Surrounded and outnumbered, he was finally dragged from his horse. When they brought him before Robb, bound and furious, Jaime laughed through bloodied lips. "You fight well for a boy," Jaime said. Robb did not laugh. "You'll answer for my father," he replied coldly. Jaime's smile faded slightly, because now the Lions had lost their greatest sword, and Tywin Lannister would not forgive that. Back in King's Landing, word of Jaime's capture hit like a hammer blow. Cersei smashed a goblet against the wall. "My son is king," she shouted. "They will not dare harm Jaime." Tyrion looked at her carefully. They might, because this was no longer a quiet political struggle. It was open war, and Ned Stark's final words continued to echo through every castle and camp. In the Reach, Renly Baratheon crowned himself king, believing charm and numbers would carry him forward. But even his claim felt weaker now. The realm had heard the accusation. Legitimacy had become a weapon, and Stannis wielded it like iron. The Seven Kingdoms were no longer divided by simple ambition. They were divided by belief, and belief burns hotter than greed. As night fell over Riverrun, Robb stood alone in his tent. Jaime Lannister was secured under heavy guard. Victory should have felt sweet. It didn't. He thought of Sansa, still in King's Landing, surrounded by enemies. He thought of Arya, missing. He thought of his father kneeling on cold stone and choosing truth over survival. Robb clenched his fists. This war would not be clean. It would not be quick. But it would be clear, because this time there was no lie holding the throne together, only fear, and fear cracks under pressure. The wolves had drawn first blood, but the lions were wounded now, and wounded lions are the most dangerous of all. The fall of Jaime Lannister changed the rhythm of the war. Before, it had been a storm building in the distance. Now, it was thunder striking all at once. When Tywin Lannister received word that his son had been captured in the Whispering Wood, he did not rage. He did not curse. He simply closed his eyes for a long moment. Then, he began planning. Jaime was not just a son, he was a symbol, the greatest knight in the realm. The golden sword of House Lannister. His capture made the lions look vulnerable, and vulnerability invited enemies. Tywin knew what Robb Stark had done. The boy had not fought with blind northern honor. He had used speed. surprise, strategy. That made him dangerous. Very dangerous. Terry Gandris, commanders, we will not rush to free Jaime, he said coldly. We will make the Starks pay so dearly for this war that they beg for peace. The Riverlands would bleed first. Villages were burned deliberately now. Crops destroyed, livestock slaughtered. It was cruel, calculated warfare. Tywin intended to break Robb's support by making the land itself suffer. Meanwhile, at Riverrun, Jaime Lannister sat in chains beneath thick stone walls. He was treated as a high-born captive, but still a prisoner. Catelyn Stark visited him one evening. Jaime looked up as she entered. "Come to see the monster?" he asked lightly. "My husband is dead," Catelyn said quietly. "Executed after speaking the truth." Jaime's smirk faded slightly. "You know what he said," she continued. "Was it a lie?" Jaime held her gaze. For once, he did not joke. "He believed it," Jaime replied carefully. "That is not what I asked." A long silence passed between them. Finally, Jaime leaned back against the wall. "Truth is a strange thing, Lady Stark. Sometimes it depends on who survives to tell it." Catelyn left without another word. But his answer haunted her. Far to the south, Stannis Baratheon made his move. His fleet sailed from Dragonstone under dark skies, cutting across Blackwater Bay with purpose. Unlike Renly, who gathered knights and banners with charm and feasts, Stannis moved like iron through water-hard cold, unstoppable. His letters had spread Ned Stark's final declaration across the realm. Many lords hesitated to support him openly, but doubt weakened Joffrey's cause. When Stannis landed near Storm's End, he demanded allegiance. Renly refused. Brothers stood on opposite sides of the same claim, and beneath a sky thick with tension, the Baratheon brothers prepared to clash. In King's Landing, Tyrion Lannister tightened the city's defenses. He ordered massive chains forged to stretch across the Blackwater. Wildfire was secretly produced in large quantities beneath the city. He did not trust Joffrey to lead. He did not trust Cersei to stay calm. He trusted preparation. One night, as he walked through the Red Keep, he found Sansa Stark standing quietly by a window. She looked thinner, older somehow. "You must hate us," Tyrion said gently. She turned toward him, her voice steady despite everything. "My father died telling the truth." Tyrion studied her face. "Yes," he said, "he did. And that truth was the one thing the Lannisters could not silence." Back in the Riverlands, Robb Stark began to win small victories. His commanders respected him now. Even the older lords who had doubted his youth saw something in him, calculation mixed with quiet fury. They began calling him the Young Wolf. But war is never simple. News arrived from the south that Renly Baratheon had been found dead under mysterious circumstances. Stannis quickly absorbed much of his brother's army. The balance shifted again. Stannis was coming, and he was coming fast. In Riverrun's great hall, Robb listened as reports were read. "Stannis marches toward King's Landing," a messenger said. Robb nodded slowly. "If he takes the city, Joffrey falls," one lord muttered. "But what then?" another asked. "Do we kneel to Stannis?" The hall grew quiet, because that was the question. Ned Stark had declared Joffrey illegitimate. By law, that made Stannis the rightful king. But law and loyalty are not always the same. Robb stood. "My father died for the truth," he said. "If Stannis sits the Iron Throne by right, we will not deny it." Some lords shifted uneasily. "But," Robb continued, his voice firm, "the North will not forget what the South has done to us. We will not be treated as pawns in their games again." The idea began forming then, not rebellion, but something close: autonomy, respect. Not a boy kneeling blindly, but a lord negotiating from strength. Because this time the North had not risen out of confusion. They had risen behind a martyr. As Stannis' fleet approached Blackwater Bay, the city braced for impact. Cersei paced like a trapped lioness. Joffrey boasted loudly but rarely left the safety of the Red Keep. Tyrion stood on the walls, watching the horizon. He knew the coming battle would decide everything. Not just the throne, but whether Ned Stark's final words would reshape the realm or die beneath wildfire and steel. The ships appeared at dawn, hundreds of them, black sails cutting through mist. The war that Ned Stark had unleashed with a single refusal had reached its most dangerous point, and this time, no confession could save anyone. Dawn broke red over Blackwater Bay. From the walls of King's Landing, the sea looked alive. Stannis Baratheon's fleet stretched across the horizon, dark ships cutting through the mist like blades. Drums echoed over the water. Horns answered from the city walls. Tyrion Lannister stood still, watching. "So it begins," he murmured. Behind him, Joffrey shifted nervously in polished armor that had never seen real battle. "They'll break against our walls," the boy king said loudly, more to convince himself than anyone else. Tyrion did not reply. Out on the water, Stannis stood at the front of his flagship. His jaw was set. His eyes were fixed on the city. "They hide behind lies and a boy," he said quietly. "Today, we end it." His fleet advanced. The first ships entered the mouth of the Blackwater Rush without resistance. That was the trap. Tyrion waited. The great chain beneath the water rose slowly, blocking the river's mouth. Confusion rippled through Stannis' fleet as ships struggled to turn, and then Tyrion gave the signal. Wildfire, a single flaming arrow streaked across the sky. When it struck, the world seemed to explode. Green fire swallowed the river in an instant. Ships burned from the inside out. Men screamed as flames clung to their skin like living things. The water itself seemed to ignite. From the walls, soldiers stared in horror. Even Tyrion felt sick at the sight, but Stannis did not retreat. His surviving ships pushed forward through fire and wreckage. Soldiers leapt into the river, swimming toward the shore. Ladders rose against the walls. The battle had moved to land. Steel rang against steel. Arrows darkened the sky. The smell of smoke and blood filled the air. Joffrey stood for a while, shouting orders, but when the fighting grew closer and more brutal, he retreated inside the Red Keep. Tyrion stayed. He led men personally, rallying them when they faltered. He fought in the mud near the gates, his small frame moving with fierce determination. This was no longer about pride. This was survival. Stannis himself reached the walls. His soldiers nearly breached the mud gate. For a moment, it seemed the city might fall. Then horns sounded from the south. Fresh banners appeared. Lannister crimson, Tyrell green and gold. Tywin Lannister had arrived with the strength of the Reach behind him. The combined force smashed into Stannis' exhausted army from the rear. The tide turned violently. By nightfall, the Blackwater ran thick with ash and bodies. Stannis was forced to retreat, dragging what remained of his army back to his ships. The city had held, but it had barely survived. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei sat in the throne room, pale and shaken. She had prepared poison for herself and her youngest son if the city fell. She had been ready to end it. When news came that Stannis was retreating, she did not celebrate. She only exhaled. Tyrion, wounded and bloodied, collapsed in his chambers later that night. He had saved the city, but he knew something others did not. This victory did not erase doubt. It only delayed reckoning, because across the realm people would not forget what Ned Stark had declared. Stannis had failed to take the city, but he had not been crushed completely. And in the Riverlands, Robb Stark received word of the battle. "Stannis has been defeated," the messenger said. The hall grew tense. "So Joffrey remains on the throne," one lord muttered bitterly. Robb sat quietly. He had hoped Stannis might succeed, not because he loved the man, but because it would have ended the question of legitimacy cleanly. Now things were messier. Stannis still lived, Joffrey still ruled, and Tywin Lannister had proven once again that he was the most dangerous player in the game. Catelyn approached her son after the council dispersed. "If Stannis failed, what do we do?" she asked softly. Robb stared into the fire. "The truth does not die because one battle was lost," he said slowly. "Father's words still stand. He had won victories in the field. Jaime Lannister remained his prisoner. The North and Riverlands still followed him. But now a choice stood before him. Kneel to Joffrey and pretend nothing had changed? Submit to Stannis, who might never recover strength, or claim something new entirely? The Northern Lords had begun whispering again, not about bending the knee, but about crowns. Robb could feel it building, not rebellion for ambition, but independence born from betrayal. His father had died exposing a lie. Why should the North continue serving a throne built on Southern corruption? As snow began to fall lightly outside River Run, Robb Stark realized something. Ned's refusal had not just started a war. It had broken the illusion that the Iron Throne was untouchable. And once people see a throne bleed, they stop fearing it the same way. The wolves had tasted victory. The lions had survived. The stag had been wounded. The realm stood balanced on a knife's edge. And the next decision Robb made would change everything. Winter crept closer, quiet, but unstoppable. In River Run's great hall, the banners of the North and the Riverlands hung heavy in the cold air. The fire in the hearth burned bright, yet it did little to warm the tension gathering among the lords. They had all heard of the Battle of the Blackwater. Stannis had failed. Joffrey still sat the Iron Throne. Tywin Lannister had returned to King's Landing stronger than before, now allied with House Tyrell. The war had shifted again. Robb Stark stood at the center of the hall, silent as his bannermen argued. "We cannot kneel to that boy," Great Chanyu member growled. "Not after what he did to your father. And we will not kneel to Lannisters hiding behind him," Lord Karstark added bitterly. Another lord spoke more cautiously. "If Stannis lives, by law the throne is his." Lord Eddard declared Joffrey false. "Are we oath-breakers now, if we do not support Stannis?" The word oath hung in the air. Ned Stark had died for honor. Robb felt the weight of that more than anyone. Catelyn watched her son closely. She could see the storm building inside him. "My father died speaking the truth," Robb said finally. His voice was calm but firm. "He did not die so we could trade one Southern king for another and pretend we are safe." The hall quieted. "The South plays its games with crowns and alliances," Robb continued. "And every time, the North bleeds." Murmurs of agreement spread. "We followed Robert once," Robb said. "We trusted the throne. And what did it bring us? My father's execution, my sisters held hostage." His hands tightened slightly at that. "We rose because the Iron Throne murdered our lord," he finished. "Not because we desired its favor." Greatjon Umber stepped forward. "Then say the words, boy." Robb looked up sharply. "Say what we all know," Umber said. "The North does not belong to them." The room seemed to hold its breath. Catelyn felt fear crawl into her chest. This was dangerous, but it was also inevitable. Slowly, Robb walked toward the great table. He placed his hands upon it and looked at each lord in turn. "My father exposed a lie," he said quietly, "and in doing so he broke the spell that held the realm together." He paused. "If the Iron Throne cannot protect its own honor, if it executes the hand of the king for telling the truth, then it has no claim over us." The words felt heavier than steel. Greatjon Umber suddenly drew his sword and dropped to one knee. "The king in the North." He roared. The shout echoed against stone. One by one, the lords followed. "The king in the North. The king in the North." It was not planned. It was not rehearsed. It was born from anger, pride, and a deep wound that would not heal. Robb felt something shift in that moment. He had not sought a crown, but it was being placed upon him all the same. Catelyn closed her eyes briefly. This was no longer just a war for justice. It had become a war for independence. And there would be no easy peace now. Far away in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister received news of Robb's coronation in silence. "So," he said coldly, "the boy declares himself king." Kevin Lannister shifted uneasily. The North was always difficult to control. Tywin's eyes hardened. Rebellion must be crushed completely, or it spreads. But Tywin understood something deeper. Ned Stark's refusal to confess had done more than accuse Joffrey. It had given the North moral ground to stand on. They did not look like rebels chasing power. They looked like a people rejecting corruption. That made them far more dangerous. In the Red Keep, Joffrey reacted very differently. "They dare," he shrieked. "I'll have his head beside his father's." Cersei tried to calm him, but fear flickered in her eyes, because every new king declared weakened Joffrey's image further. Stannis still claimed the throne. Now Robb Stark wore a crown in the north. The Seven Kingdoms were splintering, and all of it traced back to that moment on the Sept steps when Ned Stark chose truth over survival. Meanwhile, beyond the wall, darker things stirred unnoticed. The Night's Watch sent desperate ravens south, warning of strange movements in the far north. But the realm was too busy tearing itself apart to listen. Back in River Run, Robb stood alone after the hall emptied. A crown of bronze and iron rested on the table before him. It was simple, ancient in design, modeled after the crowns of the old kings of winter. He stared at it. Grey Wind lay at his feet, silent and watchful. "I never wanted this," Robb whispered, but he understood now. This was not about wanting. It was about consequence. His father's final words had forced the realm to choose, and Robb had chosen the north. Outside, snow began to fall heavier. War would continue. Harder now, bloodier, because kings do not surrender easily, and the boy who once marched for justice now wore a crown forged from grief. The game had changed. The wolves no longer fought merely for revenge. They fought for a kingdom of their own. Snow fell thick across the riverlands, but the war did not slow. If anything, Robb's coronation made it burn hotter. The moment word spread that the North had declared its own king, Tywin Lannister shifted his strategy. This was no longer a rebellion that could be settled with negotiation or hostage exchanges. This was separation, and separation threatened everything. If the North could break away because of moral outrage, what would stop Dorne one day? Or the Iron Islands? Or even the Reach? Tywin would not allow that idea to grow. In Harrenhal, Lannister forces regrouped. Ravens flew day and night. Gold flowed quietly to secure alliances. And behind closed doors, darker conversations began. Meanwhile, in Riverrun, Robb Stark felt the weight of his crown settle deeper with each passing day. Being called Your Grace felt wrong. It felt too large for him. But his men believed in him, and belief, he was learning, was stronger than steel. Reports arrived daily. Tywin was reinforcing King's Landing. The Tyrell alliance had strengthened Joffrey's hold on the capital. Stannis had retreated to Dragonstone, wounded but not broken. And worst of all, Sansa remained in the Red Keep. Robb often lay awake thinking of her. If he pressed the war too hard, they might punish her. If he showed weakness, they might use her anyway. There were no clean choices. One evening, Catelyn entered his chambers quietly. "You're thinking of her," she said. Robb did not pretend otherwise. "They will use her against me," he said softly. "Yes," Catelyn replied. "They will use." Catelyn replied. "They will." A long silence passed. "Your father chose truth," she continued gently. "But truth has a cost." Robb nodded. "I will not abandon her," he said firmly. But even as he said it, he knew the battlefield rarely respected promises. Far south in King's Landing, Sansa stood in the godswood of the Red Keep, staring at the weirwood tree planted there long ago. She remembered her father kneeling in the sepem. She remembered the moment he refused to lie. She had not understood it then. She did now. He could have lived, he could have said the words, but he didn't. And because of that, the entire realm had changed. Joffrey's rule felt more fragile now. Even within the court, whispers lingered. Some lords smiled too easily. Some guards looked uncertain. The doubt Ned had planted still breathed. Tyrion noticed it too. He walked carefully through court politics, balancing Tyrell pride with Lannister power. The alliance was strong, but not unbreakable. Marjorie Tyrell charmed the people effortlessly. She fed the poor. She smiled warmly. And in doing so, she made Joffrey look smaller. Tywin saw it clearly. The throne needed legitimacy, and Joffrey did not have it. Then came the Ironborn. As the mainland fought over crowns, Balon Greyjoy saw opportunity. The north was exposed. Winterfell was lightly guarded. Theon Greyjoy, once a ward of the Starks, returned to the Iron Islands, seeking approval from his father. And approval came with a price. Betray them. The Ironborn struck swiftly. Deepwood Motte fell. Torrhen Square burned. And then, the unthinkable. Winterfell was taken. When news reached Robb, he felt the ground drop beneath him. Winterfell, his home. Bran and Rickon were there, or had been. The message was confused, broken, smoke and chaos. Robb staggered back as the letter fell from his hand. Catelyn read it and felt her heart shatter. They say the castle has fallen. For a moment, the king in the north looked very young again. "This is my fault," he whispered. He had marched south for justice and left his home vulnerable. Ned Stark had died to protect the truth of the realm, and now their own house was under attack. The war had spread too wide, too fast. Tywin heard of the Ironborn invasion and allowed himself the smallest nod. Chaos favored those prepared. The North now fought on two fronts, and stretched armies break. In the ruins of Winterfell, Theon Greyjoy stood uncertainly in the great hall he once knew as a boy. He had taken it easily, too easily, but holding it would be another matter. And beyond the wall, darker shadows moved closer still. The Night's Watch sent more desperate warnings, dead things walking, ancient threats stirring, but no king answered, because the living were too busy fighting each other. Back in Riverrun, Robb stared into the fire long into the night. His father's choice had brought clarity to the realm, but clarity did not prevent suffering. It only made it honest. "We will retake Winterfell," Robb said finally. But even as he spoke, he knew something had changed. The war was no longer about just crowns or revenge. It was about survival. The North was bleeding. The Riverlands were burning. The throne still stood. And winter was no longer just a warning. It was arriving. Slowly. Relentlessly. And the wolves were surrounded. The fall of Winterfell broke something inside Robb Stark that no battlefield ever had. When the second Raven arrived, this one darker, more desperate, the truth became worse. Bran and Rickon were believed dead, murdered, burned. The words did not feel real. Robb stood in Riverrun's courtyard as the message was read aloud. His bannermen shifted uncomfortably. No one knew what to say to a king who had just lost his brothers. Catelyn did not cry. She had no tears left. "Are we certain?" she asked quietly. "The message claims their bodies were found," the maester replied. Claims. That word echoed in Robb's mind. Claims. His father had died exposing a false claim to the throne. Now his brothers were reduced to ashes by another claim of power. Robb felt rage rising, not wild and reckless, but cold and focused. "Theon Greyjoy," he said slowly. "He grew up under our roof." The betrayal cut deeper than any sword. While Robb had been fighting lions in the south, a kraken had slipped into his home, and Tywin Lannister watched it all unfold with calculated patience. The north was fractured now, its king tied down in the Riverlands, its homeland invaded, its strength divided. This was the cost of multiple wars. In King's Landing, the court heard of Winterfell's fall with mixed reactions. Joffrey laughed. "Let them fight among themselves," he said smugly. But Tyrion did not laugh. He understood something dangerous was happening. The North, wounded and desperate, would not surrender easily, and desperation makes men unpredictable. Meanwhile, in the ruins of Winterfell, Theon struggled to hold control. The North did not accept him. The small folk glared at him in silence. The castle felt colder than before, as if the stones themselves rejected him. He had wanted to prove himself. Instead, he felt trapped. Every decision he made only deepened his isolation. And then whispers began. The Stark boys might not be dead. Some servants claimed to have seen them escape. Theon silenced those whispers harshly. Fear was the only thing holding his fragile rule together. Back in Riverrun, Robb faced his lords again. "The Ironborn think we are weak," he said. "They think we cannot defend our own land." His voice was steady, but his eyes burned. "We will show them otherwise." Some lords urged him to march north immediately. Others warned that abandoning the Riverlands would allow Tywin to crush their allies. Every choice felt wrong. Every path led to loss. Catelyn watched her son struggle under the weight of crown and grief. She knew something else too. Jaime Lannister remained their most valuable prisoner, and perhaps their only leverage left. That night, she made a decision that would ripple through the war. Without Robb's knowledge, she went to Jaime's cell. He looked up as she entered, chains clinking softly. "You've lost something," Jaime observed quietly. Catelyn stepped closer. "If my daughters live," she said, "you will help me get them back." Jaime studied her carefully. "You would trade me?" "I would trade anything," she replied, because war had become too personal, too cruel. The next morning, Jaime Lannister was gone, freed, sent south under Brienne of Tarth's guard. When Robb discovered what had happened, fury erupted. "You released him," he demanded. Catelyn stood firm. "I chose my daughters." "You chose without your king's consent," Robb snapped. Pain flashed across her face. "I chose as a mother." The room felt heavy. Robb knew she acted from love, but love could weaken strategy, and word would spread quickly that the young wolf had lost his greatest hostage. Tywin Lannister received news of Jaime's release with something rare relief. His son lived. And with that, his motivation sharpened further. If the North fractured from within, he would exploit it. And fractures were forming. Lord Karstark, enraged by the loss of leverage and the death of his own sons in battle, began whispering openly against Robb. The army that had once felt united under justice now showed cracks of doubt. All of it spiraled outward from that single moment in King's Landing when Ned Stark refused to lie. Truth had given them purpose, but purpose did not shield them from human weakness. Far beyond the wall, the Night's Watch fought desperate battles against rising horrors. White Walkers moved in the darkness. Ancient threats stirred, and still no united realm stood to face them. The Seven Kingdoms were too busy bleeding. One evening, Robb walked alone along the battlements of Riverrun. Snow fell gently again. He thought of his father kneeling before the crowd. He thought of Winterfell burning. He thought of his missing brothers. "I will not let this destroy us," he whispered into the cold air. But for the first time since placing the crown on his head, doubt crept in. War was not a straight path. It twisted, it punished mistakes, and it demanded sacrifice. The wolves were wounded, the lions were waiting, the kraken had struck. And winter was no longer just coming. It had arrived. The snow did not stop falling. It covered the riverlands in white, as if trying to hide the blood beneath it. But no snow could cover what had already been set in motion. Robb Stark stood in his tent, staring at a map that had become more nightmare than strategy. The North was fractured. Winterfell had fallen and been burned. Bran and Rickon were still missing, their fate uncertain. Jaime Lannister had been released. Lord Karstark had executed Lannister prisoners in rage, and Robb, bound by justice, had executed Karstark in return. Every decision cost him men. Every act of honor cost him strength. He understood something now that he hadn't before. His father had chosen truth over survival. And now Robb was learning what survival demanded. The phrase. That was the next problem. To cross the twins, Robb had once promised to marry one of Walder Frey's daughters. But in his grief and loneliness, he had married Talisa instead. Love, a simple human choice. And now it carried consequences. Walder Frey felt insulted, betrayed, and insulted men with armies are dangerous. Catelyn warned him, "You must repair this. Pride cannot cost us everything." So Robb agreed to attend the wedding at the twins. Edmure Tully would marry a Frey girl in his place. It was meant to mend the alliance. But something felt wrong, too easy. Still, Robb believed in oaths, in guest right, in the old ways. He believed, like his father, that certain lines were never crossed. The night of the wedding was loud with music and forced laughter. Wine flowed freely. Walder Frey smiled with thin, watchful eyes. Robb sat beside Talisa, one hand resting gently over hers. For a brief moment, it felt almost peaceful. And then the music changed. The doors closed. The crossbows rose. Robb didn't understand at first. Then the first bolt struck. Chaos erupted. Men screamed. Blood splattered across tables. Northern lords fell before they could draw swords. Catelyn's cry cut through the hall like shattered glass. "It's a trap! Too late!" The red wedding began. Steel flashed. Arrows rained down. Talisa fell beside Robb, shock frozen on her face. Robb tried to reach her, but another bolt tore into his shoulder. He stumbled. He looked around at his dying bannermen, at betrayal unfolding in a place protected by sacred custom, and in that moment, something became painfully clear. His father had believed truth could protect the realm. Robb had believed Honor could protect alliances. Both had underestimated how far others would go to win. Roose Bolton stepped forward, calm as ever. "The Lannisters send their regards," he said quietly. The words felt like ice. Robb sank to his knees. He thought of Winterfell, of snow in the Godswood, of snow in the Godswood, of Bran climbing towers, of Arya chasing cats, of Sansa smiling at songs of knights, of his father kneeling before a crowd and choosing not to lie. Had it all been worth it? If Ned Stark had confessed, perhaps Robb would never have worn a crown. Perhaps Winterfell would not have burned. Perhaps this hall would not be soaked in blood. But then he remembered something else. If his father had lied, the realm would have remained chained to a false king without question. The truth had shattered the illusion. It had shown the rot beneath the throne. It had forced men to reveal who they truly were. And in this hall, betrayal revealed itself completely. Robb lifted his head despite the pain. "You'll never rule the North," he whispered. Roose Bolton's expression did not change. A final crossbow bolt struck, and the king in the north fell. Far away in King's Landing, news of the Red Wedding arrived with celebration among the Lannisters. Joffrey laughed. Cersei felt relief. Tywin simply nodded. One enemy removed. But even he knew something deeper. Killing Robb Stark did not erase the doubt planted by Ned's final words. The North would not forget. Stannis still lived. The Ironborn still raided. And beyond the wall, the dead were rising. The realm had won battles, but it had not healed. Years later, people would still speak of that day at the Sept of Baelor. They would say that was the moment everything truly changed. Not because a lord died, but because he refused to lie. Ned Stark's silence would have preserved temporary peace. His truth ignited war, but it also stripped the crown of its false certainty. It showed the Seven Kingdoms that the Iron Throne was not sacred. It could be questioned, challenged, even broken. And when winter finally swept across the land in full force, the realm would realize too late that while they fought over crowns, a far greater enemy had been gathering in the cold. What if Ned Stark never confessed? The answer was written in blood and snow. The war came sooner. The lies were exposed. The realm fractured faster. And though the wolves fell, they fell standing in truth. And sometimes, in a world built on power and betrayal, that truth is the most dangerous weapon of all.